I'm just gonna say this right off the bat. This might be the best live action Transformers movie. I know a lot of people will come and say Bumblebee, and Bumblebee's great, but like Robot Jocks, chef's kiss. It's sort of like how a lot of people say The Incredibles is the best Fantastic Four movie. By the way, that's not the last time I'm going to reference The Incredibles in this video, so just look out. Look out. Hey everyone, welcome to Underground Cinema. I'm Ben, your underground conductor. This week we'll be covering the 1990 film Robot Jocks. I'm just gonna say this up front, I adored it. It's just great. Leading up to this review, I actually watched Robot Jocks twice, which is abnormal for me. I typically don't do that. But something really just spoke to me about this movie. Robot Jocks is just exactly the kind of B movie that I really enjoy, where on the surface, it just seems like schlocky and cheesy, but there's actually like some deeper themes that you can dig into. A lot of interesting character work and commentary. You can really sink your teeth into this movie if you're genuinely paying attention. The production behind this movie is also incredibly interesting. According to the director of the film, Stuart Gordon, who's probably best known for his work on Reanimator and writing Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, he was inspired to make a film like this based on how popular Transformers and other like robot cartoons were in Japan, and it was sort of astonishing to him that no one had ever made that in live action, which is true. I looked into it. Aside from like the old Toho Godzilla films, Robot Jocks is the first giant robot movie in live action, which is just kind of mind-blowing that it took so long for anyone to do that. I mean, stop motion had been around forever at that point. The original King Kong came out in 1933. You could have done something like this way earlier, and no one did. Some people may come and say that Crash and Burn, which also came out in 1990, technically came out before Robot Jocks, but here's the thing. I'm pretty sure Crash and Burn is a ripoff of Robot Jocks. Let me explain why. Robot Jocks was completed in 1987. The reason it took so long to come out is because the production company, Empire Pictures, declared bankruptcy, so there was a huge delay with the film being released. Now, some of you may say, okay, so it was delayed. That doesn't change the fact that Crash and Burn came out first. Well, here's the thing. The owner of Empire Pictures, Charles Band, went on to direct Crash and Burn. Not to mention, the title Crash and Burn itself is probably taken directly from Robot Jocks, because Crash and Burn is like a term of endearment that robot pilots in the movie do with each other. It's like a fist bump. And if that's not enough to convince you, apparently in certain parts of Europe, Crash and Burn was distributed as Robot Jocks 2 Crash and Burn. So, there you go. You also can't avoid the obvious parallels that Pacific Rim has to this movie, with the giant robots fighting and the people piloting them. Like, Robot Jocks doesn't own the idea of mechs, obviously. But it is quite odd watching this movie and seeing that, and then thinking to yourself, well, if they put giant monsters in this movie, it would have been a lot different. In any case, moving on to the plot. Robot Jocks takes place in a dystopian future. It's about 50 years post a nuclear war. There's only two superpowers left, the Market and the Confederation, which are very obvious stand-ins for the two major superpowers of America and the Soviet Union. And it opens up on the tail end of a battle. The villain of the film, Alexander, he just defeated another robot pilot named Hercules. After defeating Hercules, he revels in his victory and he calls out Achilles, the main character of the film, who's one of the best robot pilots in the world. Achilles' contract is almost up. He has one last fight to complete until he's off the hook and ready to retire. So he faces off against Alexander, but during the match, 300 spectators get killed, and that results in the match being considered a draw. So a rematch is set for a week later, and at that point, Achilles says, okay, I'm done, I'm retiring. And that's sort of the main conflict of this film, the fact that Achilles has basically said, yeah, I'm not fighting anymore, which has ended up putting the market in danger, because if America loses the next fight, they're going to lose Alaska to the Soviet stand-in. So it's a relatively simple plot. There's not that much to pick apart story-wise, but you go into the deeper layers, it's very interesting. They explore the fact that Achilles' character has severe PTSD after this event, despite the fact that he tried to save all the audience members. Even visually, Achilles as a character has his trauma perfectly represented. The guy even has a scar across his face. He also apparently can't read, which is a minor character detail that they reference once and don't seem to stick to. You also have the introduction of the test tube pilots, who they call tubies in the film, as kind of a slur. The test tube baby element is actually a very interesting aspect of the story, tackling this idea that older veteran fighters are going to eventually be phased out by these bioengineered people. It's very similar to the 1998 Kurt Russell movie Soldier, where a similar thing occurs. And it's through the tubies that we're introduced to Achilles' love interest in the film, a character named Athena. I'll be frank, the love story in this film is probably the weakest element, not because it's poorly handled, but because it's inconsistent. Like with a lot of love stories that you see in films, you can tell that the main issue is that either the actors don't have chemistry or that the writing for how they get together doesn't really make sense, that there's really no proper buildup of the romantic or sexual tension. With this film, it's so odd because they keep on flip-flopping between love and hate constantly between these two characters. It's like one scene they can't stand each other, and then the next scene it seems like they're all over each other or they're really invested in like the other person's safety. It's very weird. And it's an integral element of the plot, the relationship between these two characters. Now, I'm not against the inclusion of Athena's character, but the way she was written, it really feels like she should have been more of an apprentice character and less of a love interest. That makes more sense not just because of the power imbalance between Achilles and Athena, but also because Athena, ironically, is a very naive character in this story, and the third act conflict is based entirely on the decision she makes because she thinks that she knows better than the veteran character being Achilles. Now, Achilles himself is absolutely amazing in this film. He's played by Gary Graham, who's probably best known for his work on Star Trek and Alien Nation. He's absolutely outstanding in this film. He perfectly embodies this disturbed, alienated soldier type character who just wants to leave it all behind and move on with his life. Probably the only other person in the film who gives a comparable performance to him is Paul Koslow, who plays the villain, Alexander. He brings a lot of weight and entertainment value to what is ultimately sort of a Soviet caricature of a villain. It's always a pleasure when you see Alexander on screen giving the business to other characters in the film. The world building elements are also really interesting in this story. As you can tell by a lot of the character names, there's a lot of Greco and Roman references. Even the fact that there were audiences observing what was essentially gladiatorial combat with robots, that's very much in the same vein as this idea of bread and circuses, where if you just keep your audiences placated through entertainment and you make sure you feed them, then your fractured society will ultimately stay together. Another element of this story that I found interesting, it was more of a visual element. A lot of the extras that just play random background characters in this world, they all wear respirator masks, like face masks, and post-pandemic that is a very notable thing. And they never outright say it in the film, but they're probably wearing those because of nuclear fallout. And I just love little details like that. It's like, well, we know that there was a nuclear war, and like this is just an element of the story that you see visually, so you're respecting the audience enough that they'll be able to put the pieces together on their own. I really admire that about this film. I really like this film. And I also love the subtle commentary of entertainment versus war. With the robot fights, it's essentially small-scale combat to avoid all-out war. That's why they exist. And people don't just watch them for entertainment, they also gamble on them. It's like a big aspect of society that people have really invested themselves in. I imagine probably a lot of the better ideas in this film, like the PTSD, the Greco-Roman history, the Cold War commentary, all those aspects most likely came solely from Joe Haldeman, the writer of this film. A very famous science fiction author, wrote The Forever War and was also a soldier himself. Apparently, elements of the plot were based on the Iliad, which would explain the Greco-Roman references. And interestingly enough, apparently Joe Haldeman was at odds with the director Stuart Gordon throughout most of the shoot. Gordon's idea behind this film, because he came up with the initial story, was that he wanted to basically make a live-action version of Transformers. He wanted to make a big-budget Saturday morning cartoon, and Haldeman wanted to focus more on the ideas and like the aspects of the world that you would explore in this narrative. Apparently Haldeman was concerned that he might have gotten kicked off the project at a certain point, but producers backed him, so everything turned out okay. But that conflict between writer and director may explain why certain elements of this film either don't work or are abandoned later. Certain elements like the love story between Athena and Achilles that flip-flops throughout the film and eventually sort of just gets forgotten about by the end of the movie, as well as other things like Achilles' family and how his nephews are huge fans of him, which is a smaller element of the story but still feels notable enough to include, and they just didn't. I also find it funny how a big plot point in this film is that there's a spy leaking robot information to the Soviets, and the spy turns out to be the most American character in the film, a character who's literally named Tex, like Texas, and wears a cowboy hat. In any case, while I'm sure all of you have enjoyed my discussions of the deeper themes and commentaries present in this film, I know what you're really here for. You're here for the giant robot stuff. And I gotta say, like, effects-wise, they look spectacular. It looks like a really good blend between stop motion, what I'm assuming is some minor puppeteering in certain shots, and rear projection. All those elements together just really make the robots feel as real as they can with the limited technology available at the time. The designs look good. The way the pilots plug in to the robots is incredibly interesting. It's sort of like an early version of omnidirectional movement. I also find it funny how the robot pilots are often referred to as jocks, and the outfits that they wear when piloting the robots, it looks like football padding. It probably just is football padding. But the fights you see between them, they're really good. It's just unfortunate that there isn't a lot of it in this movie. Most of this movie, which is what I enjoy, focuses on the character of Achilles and his internal conflict about whether or not he should come back to the fight, his developing romance with Athena, his rivalry with Alexander. It's building up all of these elements to the fights, and unfortunately, not counting the death of Hercules at the beginning of the movie, there's really only two fights in the film. There's the initial fight between Achilles and Alexander, and then there's the rematch. And the rematch, the final battle, is amazing. It is a bit stretched out, but it's what you'd want to see after all that buildup. They're flying into space, they're shooting lasers at each other. At a certain point, the foot of Achilles' robot gets damaged, which, if that's not a reference to the Achilles heel in Greek mythology, I don't know what is. Achilles' robot crashes, and that's when the thing happens. The thing that really sold this as a Transformers film. Achilles' robot actually transforms. Kind of. After the foot is damaged, Achilles handles the controls and transforms the bottom half of the robot into like a tread tank. It's an amazing effect looking at it. It's spectacular that they even attempted to do something like that. But unfortunately, as good as it looks, it's not really any match for Alexander. Alexander pulls out his chainsaw penis and puts some serious damage on Achilles' robot. Eventually it gets so damaged that Achilles himself has to flee onto the desert flats. Alexander's going crazy, shooting at him even though he's won the fight. But that's when probably the most amazing thing in the film happens. Remember how I mentioned that you should remember the Incredibles? Well, Achilles pulls an Incredibles. Near the end of the film, to defeat Alexander, what Achilles does is that he goes to the severed robot hand from Alexander's robot, and he plays around with the wiring, and he gets it to launch directly into Alexander's robot's chest. It's exactly like the end of The Incredibles, where Mr. Incredible takes Syndrome's robot's arm and then just has it rocket right through the actual robot. Like, I have no idea if Brad Bird ever saw Robot Jocks, but just seeing that, I thought to myself, oh my god, this is amazing. Anyway, Achilles assumes the fight is over as Alexander's robot blows up, but Alexander's a tenacious little bugger. He chases after Achilles with a pipe, they have a little combat, and Achilles is like, stop, this is enough, we don't have to do this. Alexander's all like, no, we're already dead, we're robot jocks. And Achilles is like, no, we're not, come on. He offers the crash and burn fist bump, and the movie ends with Alexander laying down his arms, giving up his bloodlust, which has been his sole characteristic throughout the entire film. and engaging in some camaraderie with his enemy. It's a very inspiring ending. The film literally ends with the two of them fist bumping, as it shows like these two ground soldiers from opposite sides coming together and realizing they're not that different, that they can learn, that they don't have to be enemies. And while I do enjoy that, and I understand its thematic relevance, it feels incredibly abrupt compared to a lot of the things that happened previously in this film. I do concede, though, this is a minor complaint, and if anything, the ending feeling abrupt to me just communicates that I wanted to see more out of this world because I really enjoyed it. But yeah, Robot Jocks. I adored this movie. I feel like I'm praising it too much. There's elements of it that don't work, like the love story between Athena and Achilles. There could have been more robot battles to keep the audience engaged. I mean, I was engaged with the character stuff, but I could see why someone would be disappointed that a movie marketed on robot fights only had like two of them. But I think more of this movie works than doesn't work. I would recommend it to anyone who likes these 80s, 90s B movies, anyone who is a big fan of stop motion. Like, it's honestly kind of remarkable to me that a $10 million schlock movie could turn out this good. And maybe it's just because we've gotten so many bad giant robot movies that this just feels like a breath of fresh air. But yeah, thanks for watching my review. Feel free to subscribe if you're feeling generous. You can also follow me on Instagram or Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes. And I will see you later. Okay, so I'm putting this in the tag for this review because I didn't know where else to put it. Something really stuck out to me that I thought was weird. There's a lot of different posters in the movie for different things because this is a society, they filled it out in different ways. One of the posters that you see a few times in the film is just a red poster that says prenatal, and it's just a woman with a baby. I'd wanted to bring that up. It's just a weird detail that I noticed, so...